Links to previous episodes are given in the video description, so don't forget to like, subscribe and share the video. The Haunt of Love and Lies. Blurb. You are mine, Sheila. Only I can make you feel this way. Your moans and your body are mine. Your body and soul belong completely to me. Alpha Killian Reid, the most feared alpha throughout the North, affluent, influential, and greatly dreaded in the supernatural realm, was the envy of other packs. He was believed to possess everything: influence, recognition, riches, and the blessing of the moon goddess. It was little known to his adversaries that he had been cursed, a secret held for many years, and only the one gifted by the moon goddess could break that curse. Sheila, the offspring of Alpha Lucius, who was Killian's arch-nemesis, had been raised surrounded by hatred, loathing, and abuse from her father. She was destined to be Alpha Killian's mate. He could not bring himself to reject her, yet he despised her and treated her badly, as his heart belonged to another woman, Thea. However, one of these two women held the potential to cure his curse, while the other was a foe lurking within. How would he discover the truth? Let's uncover it in this thrilling tale, brimming with tension, passionate romance, and treachery. Episode 1. Chapter 1. Sheila's point of view. My shaken legs could no longer withstand the tension charged in the room. My entire life had changed the second the words "mate" left my lips. I gripped onto the white pillar in the courtroom for support, the knife-edged tension within the court growing brutal by the second. Our pack warriors were behind their alpha, Lucius Colosso, no doubt prepared to attack, just in case a fight managed to break out with the warriors from the Crescent North pack. My father, Lucius, was in a heated conversation with Alpha Killian about me. It was funny how the confrontation a second ago about my father sending rogues to the Crescent North pack soon changed into an intense conversation between my father, Alpha of the Silver Mist pack, and Alpha Killian of the Crescent North pack, my mate. It still feels like a dream to me how my entire life changed for the worse within a minute. It was as if the universe hated me, and the moon goddess despised me. At that moment, he was here, Alpha Killian Reid, charging in with a troop of his warriors into our pack, with fury stalking his veins, and then, to my utter disbelief, he happened to be my fated mate. I listened more to their conversation. Neither of them was ready to take a rest. My father couldn't do better to hide his satisfaction in sending me off with the enemy. For some reason, Killian kept refusing me, almost as if he was rejecting me. Even though I'm quite used to people's rejection, I've experienced it firsthand with my father, the infamous Lucius Colosso. Killian's rejection hurt me more than I'd like to admit. I mean, even though I just found out he was my name, we shared a bond after all. Father and Killian looked at each other like they were a second from murdering the other, as they kept deciding my fate like I wasn't even in the room. This was about me, yet Killian had not cast a second glance on me. It sent a piercing pain to my chest. As you wish, Alpha Lucius, I will take her away, Killian spoke with ease, but there was something about the way he counted those words that made me cringe. It was cold and threatening. It could almost be called a miracle that the courtroom still remained calm. Every pack in the North Central was aware of the rooted hatred between both packs. They both had the largest packs in all of the North, and my father didn't like it one bit. He was a tyrant alpha and a beast who preyed on packs, annihilating them and stealing their lands. That was the type of alpha my father was. And Killian was rumored to be no different. I was forced to shake off my thoughts when Alpha Lucius was up on his feet. He smiled darkly after one last gruesome stare at me. That smile of his has haunted my every awakening. She is yours after all. You may take her. He glanced at me. He never treated me like his daughter. My years growing up within the walls of the pack house have been the literal definition of the term. In that state, the only thing that kept me going was finding my mate. I always heard stories from the servants about the mate bond and its undying love. I always prayed for a mate, even though deep down I knew my chances were nil. Unlike most wolves that were blessed with their wolf counterpart at 16, mine never came. So, it was unbelievable that I would be given a mate. My legs finally gave up, collapsing against the pillar which could no doubt feel my plight. Killian's demeanor was cold, dominating, and even intimidating. His eyes gauged me, regarding me. I felt uncomfortable under his cold stare. The cold mask he had worn did not allow me an inkling of his true thoughts. Tell her to be prepared. I'll send someone to take her before dusk. Killian's gruesome eyes fell on me. Even just by staring at me, one could see the cold glacial that were aimed at my throat. How could I possibly be mated to him? I almost gasped. I was fudging right there, yet he was ignoring me. That won't be necessary, she can leave with you. My father was in fact excited to send me away with him. Just like that, like a terrible nightmare, what little belongings I owned in this place that never seemed like home were bundled by the servants. My horse was saddled for me, and my little belongings were all packed up by the servants, and I was literally shoved out by my father. We began the ride to the Crescent North Pack, my new home. Killian was beside me, on my left was his delta, and the other warriors trailed behind. We rode in absolute silence on our way to the Crescent North Pack. Even when I forced myself to say something, what greeted me was a brutal silence and a murderous glare from him. So, I decided it was best to keep mute instead. The uncomfortable silence lingered for hours as we rode past the mountains, to the other side of the north, into the capital, which I heard was under his territory. After a while, we arrived at the notorious Crescent North Pack, known for everything it stood for. We rode a few more and we arrived at a castle. It was beautiful from the outside. Like nothing that I've seen before, it was truly beautiful. When we approached the castle, some warriors sauntered to us, bowing in respect to Killian. They took the reins of the horses, while someone helped me with my belongings. I helped myself down, feeling everyone's curious eyes on me. There was no way anyone would have expected Killian to be arriving with his mate, who happened to be his enemy's daughter. Alpha. A woman approached us with the servants, but from the manner in which she spoke, I could tell she was someone with ranking. She bowed her head in respect to Killian. Her curious eyes fell on me. The questions were vividly written in her eyes, but for some reason, she didn't dare ask them. Brielle, please have a private chamber prepared for her. And you? He turned to me, his eyes so intimidating and dominating that I had to shift my gaze from him. You look at me when I speak to you. Involuntary, my eyes fell on him. His tone, on the other hand, kept getting harsher and deadlier with the passing second. I stared unblinkingly into his amber eyes. I will deal with you later, Killian said, in the usual domineering tone I was getting accustomed to. He barely looked my way and started walking off to the entrance door, leaving me with Brielle. I was left confused. A private chamber for me? Why? But we were mates, shouldn't we be sharing the same chamber? The woman, Brielle, walked closer to me, her lips holding a plastered smile. Killian. His name left my lips for the first time. It seemed to have gained his attention. He came to a halt and swerved to face me. From today onwards, it'll be Alpha to you. He spoke to me like he was addressing a subject. I was his mate, for crying out loud. I was upset, but I played it cool, remaining calm. He was still my mate, after all, and it was just my first day here. I ignored his words. Why a private chamber? We are mates, we should share the same chamber. His amber eyes became stony, and his soft lips, which were the color of cherries, curled up amusingly. Killian moved closer to me, so close that our noses could almost kiss. I felt his hot breath fan my face. My breathing became hitched, and my legs became too weak to stand. The attraction between us was too strong to ignore. Couldn't he feel it too? My question was soon answered by his stern words. You mean absolutely nothing to me, Sheila Colasso. There was a sharp stab in my chest. My eyes were round, full of questions and hurt. If he didn't want me, why was I here? My lips parted to speak when a voice interrupted us. Killian, the voice said, jerking my head in the direction of the voice. It came from a woman around my age. She was a stunning beauty with jet black hair. She moved with a kind of elegance that suited her. Who was she? She came to us, standing beside Killian. Her eyes were upon me. She looked really calm and gentle, but there was a fire of rage flashing through her eyes, which faded so quickly. Her effortless smile reappeared, moving to Killian. Killian. The way she called his name made my stomach churn. Who is she? She asked him. It made my insides curl up. Killian's eyes trailed from the woman, finding mine. That's exactly what I should be asking. Killian wrapped his hands around her waist. A little problem I encountered at Silver Mist Pack. A little problem? Was that what he thought of me? A problem? Oh, I see, she said in a condescending tone. I judged her too quickly, she was anything but calm and gentle. There was something about her that was deceptive. I am Sheila Colasso, his mate. And who are you? I asked, her eyes widened. Watch your words in my castle. Thea is your superior and my chosen mate. She is to be respected. His words hurt me. If he had someone else, why did he accept me? His words seemed to gladden Thea. She leaned into his arms, placing a kiss on his lips, right before me, his rightful mate. I couldn't take this insult. Basically, you are saying this thing is your asterisk. I said with disgust. My words didn't sit well with Thea, as she began crying. Seeing her tears, Killian's eyes landed on me. His bright amber eyes became dark with rage and hate. I felt my heart prickle with fear. I clearly warned you to watch your words in my castle. Thea is your superior, therefore, she should be respected in my castle. Since you've proven quite stubborn, you'll be punished for your actions." I was confused. I had no idea what he was saying. Before I knew it, I was surrounded by the pack warriors. "Take her to the dungeon." His murderous glare made my heart stop. I had no idea what was going on. Sheila's point of view, I was trembling hard. My fear and confusion were imprinted on my face. I looked around at the warriors that surrounded me, my fearful eyes meeting those of my mate. His stony expression weakens me the more. At Killian's command, I was grabbed roughly on both arms by the warriors. My broken gaze refused to look away from Killian's. "What is the meaning of this?" My voice came out as a whisper, my voice totally betraying my emotions. "I am your mate." The words left my lips, and I watched them shatter before Killian's frosty gaze. But he didn't seem to care. That didn't matter to him. "This will teach you exactly how to behave in my pack." He regarded me with icy stares. "Take her." His cold words pierced me deeply where it hurt the most, while he had his arms around the other woman, his lover. I was dragged into the castle, down the corridors, and thrown into a dark dungeon, and the wooden door slammed behind me. I crashed on the harsh, cold floors with darkness circling around me. Frozen on the spot, I still couldn't move past that moment, the icy stare of my mate. His hatred and anger for me couldn't be hidden. I didn't know when my eyes gathered with tears, and they rolled carelessly from my eyes. He hated me. My own mate hated me. I brought my hands to my face, sobbing profusely. The last time I felt this hurt and broken with tears in my eyes was when I was only 12 and was tortured by my father for speaking to the servants. I was tortured a lot worse than this, but that didn't even hurt this much. I curled against the cold walls, bawling my eyes out in the darkness. I had no idea when I fell asleep in the darkness. I woke up to the deafening silence that echoed through the walls. There was no way of knowing how long I'd been down here. It was cold, and whatever I was sitting on was making my body hurt. The floor was hard and humid. The cold air around me was making me tremble. All I could do was wait in the darkness for a long time. At that same moment, the big wooden door made a loud squeak, and a very strong gleam illuminated the place. I had to pull my hand up to protect my eyes from the light, and when I had adjusted to the environment, I looked up and saw Killian. My breath hitched, getting stuck in my throat. His tall and dominating figure moved closer to me as I forced my legs to stand. He had a towering height that I had to force my gaze up to. He bore down on me with flickers of raw emotions that I recognized as hatred and disgust. I clutched the silken fabric of my dress, fighting back the urge to cry. "Let's get one thing straight. I have only one woman in my life, and that is Thea, and no one else." His voice was more brutal than the winter's gravest wind and sharper than any sword to my chest. "You mean nothing to me, Sheila Colasso. Absolutely nothing." He made sure to enunciate every word, which echoed within the walls of my head, murdering me. "I have a few rules on how I run my pack. Everyone must abide by them, and that includes you. If you abide by these rules, your stay in my pack will be bearable, comfortable, and livable enough." His voice was so deep and so smooth, with a faint accent. I could easily listen to it all day, even though he sounds so ruthlessly cold. I didn't speak. I couldn't trust my own voice not to betray me. Instead, I listened to him, like an obedient little wolf. Firstly, he began, you speak only when spoken to. Secondly, you are not allowed to step out of your chambers without my permission. Thirdly, you are only allowed in my office when called upon and never allowed in my chambers, ever. Fourthly, you are not allowed to step out of the castle without my permission either. And lastly, stay out of Thea's way. That's a warning, Sheila. He hissed with so much hatred that I winced at the intensity. Flouting these rules will only earn you excruciating punishment. He concluded without any emotion. I could only stare in utter disbelief at his words. Without hesitation, he turned his back to me, heading to the door. Why? I asked breathlessly, in pain and tears. Why Killian? I am your mate. No matter how hard I thought about it, I couldn't think of a plausible reason why he despised me so much. He stopped moving for a minute and turned to face me. In a flash, Killian was before me, his large hand on me, but not the way I would have wanted it. His firm grip squeezed my neck, slamming my back against the merciless wall. Killian. I choked, unable to breathe, while my hands fell on his. I warned you, it's Alpha to you. His hold tightened, and I was gasping for air. Please, you are hurting me, I could barely hear my voice, staring into his eyes, which were glowing a streak of bright yellow, or golden. But he didn't let go. My hands clung to his tightly, pleadingly. I could feel the tingling sparks that erupted at the mere contact. Please, Alpha, I whispered, a tear rolling down my eyes. Reluctantly, he let go, dropping me on the floor. I clutched onto my neck, swallowing as much air as I could in tears. You will spend the rest of the night here, serving your punishment. He stared down at me like I meant absolutely nothing. Casting one last glance at me, Killian stormed out of the dungeon, leaving me in a dark and cold space by myself again. I curled up on the floor, shedding tears. After a while, the wooden door squeaked open, and a plate of food was tossed inside. I finished my food, waiting in silence. These were the worst hours of my life, being locked up by my own mate. I slept for some time, even though my body seemed very much alive the whole time. It was a sleep full of my usual nightmares, which made me wake up scared all the time. The wooden door opened again, allowing a ray of sunlight into the room, accompanied by a familiar face. The young woman I met outside the castle. Hello, do you remember me? I am Brielle, I said, recalling her name. She gave a small smile. The Alpha asked me to take you to your chamber. I stood up on my feet, quietly, without saying a word. Brielle led me out of the dungeon. I was finally escorted to what looked like my own chamber. Brielle locked the door, looking at me thoughtfully. Oh, my lady, why did you pick a fight with Thea? Didn't the Alpha tell you about his lover? No. I shook my head, truthfully. She sent me a pitiful look. Well, that's it. Thea is like the Alpha's most favorite person in the castle. I felt a pain in my chest. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that. I just wanted you to know that he cares deeply about her. I could barely form a word. I'll run you a warm bath, my lady, and after that send someone to fetch some food for you. Meanwhile, if you need anything, just let me know, my lady. She hurried past me, but I stopped her, holding her hand. Thank you. And please, call me Sheila. She smiled. All right, Sheila. She went to the lavatory, and in a few minutes, she was out. She was about to say something when a knock came at the door. A young lady strutted in. She looked younger than me, with black hair that framed her heart-shaped face perfectly. Ah, this is Rhiannon, and she'll be serving you, Brielle informed me. The young girl smiled, bowing her head in respect. At your service, my lady. Please just call me Sheila, I said, feeling uncomfortable with formalities. She smiled, glancing at Brielle. If that's okay, my lad. She paused. Sheila, and I'm going to call you Ria. By the way, the elders are here, Ria said in haste, turning to Brielle. The elders? As in the Council of Elders? Every Alpha in the North was a part of the Council, including the Alpha of the Crescent North Pack, Killian, my mate. The Council was a circle that consisted of several supernatural kinds, each having a representative within the Council. The Council Elders are the oldest wolves and represent our kind in the Council. I looked at Brielle, whose frightened eyes held mine, then at Ria. Why are the Council Elders here? Third-person point of view. Killian was training with some warriors at the training field on the east side border of the pack, which was a distance away from the witch's quarters within the pack. He stomped his feet into the ground, gesturing the warriors to charge at him, and one after the other, they lunged at Killian. His eyes gleamed brightly, indicating his wolf, Riker, was sharing partial control with him. In a flash, one by one, Killian pounded on them and thrashed them against the dusty earth. Xavier was behind him. His claws were extended, almost on Killian, but he caught him just in time, pinning him to the ground as well. That was close. No one had been that close to gutting him whenever they trained. Killian knew part of the reason was that he was distracted, and he hated every bit of it. His eyes went hazy, he was being mind-linked by his beta, Alan. Killian pulled a hand up in the air to halt the warriors, connecting with Alan. What? Killian grunted in his usual deep and husky voice, unable to keep his frustration and rage at bay. You need to come to the castle at once, he spoke with urgency. Killian furrowed his brows, alarmed. Why? It's the Council Elder Wolves. They are here, Alan replied in haste, making his body stiffen. The Council Elder Wolves? A flash of rage stalked his amber eyes. Why were they here? Killian asked in silence, not getting any response from his wolf, Riker. He left the field for the castle and found Alan in the hallway of his office, waiting for him, along with Mason, the head warrior of his pack, and also, his best friend. They are all inside, Mason notified him. Killian went inside with his beta and best friend strutting behind him, finding 5 elder wolves from the council seated in the office. Killian reached for his chair, taking a seat with Mason and Alan on both sides of his chair. And to what do I owe your visit, elders? Killian went straight to the point. He was in no mood for pleasantries or beating around the bush. They were here for a reason, and deep down, he could guess as much. The council elder wolves were high-ranking members of the council courts and were highly respected among the werewolf kind, due to their long existence. The council was a circle formed by various supernatural types, each of which had one representative in the council. Every alpha in the north was a member of the council, and the elder wolves represented their species. The council was formed solely to ensure peace within the supernatural realm and protect the interests of every kind. From the coldness laced in your tone, we are getting the feeling that we are not welcomed in your territory, Alpha Killian. Killian leveled his gaze to meet Elder Nels, who spoke, leaning deeper into the chair. His words didn't surprise Killian at all. Elder Nell and Killian never got along. So, Killian didn't bother masking his true feelings. The elder's presence here in his pack simply spelled trouble that he was sure he wouldn't fancy. But nonetheless, he spoke up, holding a frosty, short smile. I apologize greatly. But I'm in a hurry, so I'd appreciate it if you could all tell me what you're here for so we can get this over with. Elder Philip shuffled in his chair, his hand folded under his chin. Fine. As you wish, Killian nodded coldly in concurrence. He couldn't agree any less. It is to our knowledge, that alas, you have found your mate, Alpha Killian, Elder Zed began. Killian paused for a moment. The mention of the word mate had never dwelt well with him. He clenched his jaw, his hand curling into a ball. Something in his chest tightened. But Killian kept an expressionless face, keeping his demeanor neutral. Killian scanned the elders one by one. I see you're a little too interested in my pack business. May I remind you that whatever happens in my pack is none of your business, as long as we don't break the rules of the council. Killian reminded them, just in case they had forgotten their place. Even though they were the old wolves, they had no right to get involved in his pack business. You are correct, Alpha Killian, and trust us, we don't want to meddle in the Crescent North pack, but this matter is important to us. Alpha Silas spoke up, his voice echoing off the corner walls. And as the old wolves, we have an obligation to perform. Killian creased his brows in confusion, placing a hand on the wooden table before him. And what is that? The Luna's coronation, Elder Walter, who had been quiet, spoke up. Killian felt Alan and Mason twitch beside him but didn't say a word. In every pack, it has been our duty to coronate the Lunas, and in this case, you have found your mate, Elder Walter added. Killian tilted his head coldly, his eyes falling on Elder Nell. That is fine by me, but, Killian paused. You will only be crowning Thea Chrysler as my Luna. Killian watched the elders' faces colored with rage. But he managed to still keep his demeanor neutral. Thea was the woman who had been etched in his destiny and the one who deserved to be the Luna of his pack, and not the other woman, not the enemy's daughter, not the woman the moon goddess had carelessly tossed in his path to be a weakness that he couldn't afford. At least not now that he was finally a step closer to breaking the curse inflicted on him and his pack by his own father. Killian has made this clear to the elders several times already. When he had found Thea after so many years of searching for the one blessed by the moon goddess to save him and put an end to his curse, Killian informed the elders to coronate her as his Luna at once, but they declined, saying she was not his destined mate. And now they were here, trying to have the enemy's daughter as his Luna. That will never be possible. She isn't your mate, Alpha Killian. Elder Nell said. Killian could tell that the elderly man was struggling hard to contain his rage. But Killian could hardly care. She is the one I have chosen as my Luna, Killian said, keeping his ground. It didn't matter what they said, Thea was the one Killian wanted and the one his pack needed. And what about your destined mate? What about her? Elder Zed asked. If you've already made your choice on Thea, why then haven't you rejected her yet? At Elder Zed's question, Killian's wolf, Riker, stretched at the back of his mind. But before he could mutter a word, Killian shut him out. He knew he had to think clearly with his head and not be influenced by the silliness of the supposed mate bond. Don't delude yourself, Alpha Killian. Even you can't be immune to the mate bond. If you don't want your mate, then do the needful, otherwise, she will be crowned as your Luna in a few days. Elder Philip declared. Killian's gaze widened. You can't possibly mean that? He asked, his eyes round with astonishment. Your Luna will be crowned on the night of the full moon, which is 2 nights away, Elder Walter added. That will not happen. Killian was up on his feet, his fists pounding on the table, meeting the eyes of the elders. You cannot do this. As the supreme elder wolves of the council courts, we've made our decision, and there's nothing you can do, Elder Nell said firmly, and the elders were up on their feet. We will see, was all Killian could mutter before they finally left the room. Alan and Mason rushed to his side, looking as worried as he was. What do we do now? Alan was the first to speak up. The elders meant every word they said. This full moon she will be crowned instead. We can't let that happen. Mason voiced. Remember the curse. At the mention of the last word, Killian's eyes pulled open instantly. A lot was at stake, his future and the future of his pack. He couldn't risk it all now, not after how long they'd searched for an answer, for Thea. Killian, you have no choice now, you must reject her once and for all, Mason insisted. No. Rejection isn't something that should be taken so lightly. First of all, we should think of a way to change the elders' minds. Alan suggested. That was the thing. Killian knew there was no way that would be possible. Nothing can persuade those elders to change their minds. They'd done well for years keeping their curse hidden, so the Crescent North Pack wouldn't be perceived as weak. Their reputation had helped greatly, but time was slowly running out, and Killian could feel it. He shouldn't think selfishly and risk the future of his pack. He had to do what had to be done. He stood still, his eyes ruthlessly cold, showing absolutely no emotion. Mason is right. We can't afford any mistakes now. We can't risk my future and the future of everyone else in the pack. He looked them in the eyes. I have to put an end to this. He had to reject her. Without saying much, Killian left the office, roving to the west wing of the castle, to Sheila's quarters. Without much of a courtesy knock on the door, Killian barged into her chamber. His eyes fell on Brielle and Rhiannon, who he had stationed by her side. Brielle and Rhiannon lowered their heads instantly, but Killian's eyes were on the flawless, pristine figure that stared at him with her round, perfect eyes. Leave us! At his command, Brielle and Rhiannon scampered out of the chamber, leaving just Killian and his mate, Sheila. Get up! Sheila flinched visibly at his loud tone, standing up from the bed. She didn't say anything, staring back at him with those crystal blue eyes of hers that had managed to haunt his thoughts for the last hours. She parted her lips to say something but was instead greeted with Killian's large hand on her neck, again. She was quickly against the wall, his hand on her throat and the other on her waist, thanks to his superhuman speed. She felt the tingles that were rather too quick to erupt. Killian leaned in closer, so close that their noses briefly collided, and she could taste his breath on her lips. She felt hot, or perhaps the room was still steamy from her shower, she couldn't tell because she couldn't think straight. Killian's lips brushed past her cheeks, to her ears. Sheila Colasso. He called her name like it was a venomous poison to his lips. His eyes met hers again. Killian felt his wolf, Riker, retreat to the back of his mind. He couldn't take what was about to be said. Killian looked coldly at her, his lips hovering over hers as the words left his lips. I, Killian Reid, Alpha of the Crescent North Pack, reject you, Sheila Kala. The words instantly stuck in his throat, and his eyes widened profusely in shock and confusion, meeting her crystal blue eyes. There was something in them. This is not possible. Sheila's point of view. My eyes held fear as those words left Killian's lips like they meant absolutely nothing. He was rejecting me. I felt a dying in my chest. Even though burning tears had gathered in my eyes, I tried to convince myself that it was for the best. Suddenly, Killian paused, almost as if the words were stuck in his throat. I could see the shock and confusion in his eyes through glassy vision. Why did you stop? My lips moved faster than I would have liked, as I listened to the fast beating of my heart. His hold on me tightened hard. Finish it, reject me, and let's get this over with, I yelled, tears rolling from my eyes. No. This isn't possible. He whispered under his breath to himself, but I could hear him just fine. My eyes were similarly perplexed. Killian's eyes hardened more, and his hand choked me deeper to the wall. What are you doing? He asked, looking intensely into my eyes like they were showing something in them. Something that confused him. Whatever was bothering him was the least of my worries. I could feel the air slowly vanishing from my lungs. My hands squeezed his, ignoring the tingles, and the overpowering desire to lean into his chest. My nails dug deep into his skin. Let go of me. He let go of me, tossing me like I weighed nothing on the bed. His eyes were fixated on me, unmoving, almost as if he was contemplating, and conflicted. But then those emotions were replaced by a cold stare sent my way. In 2 days, on the full moon, the council will be holding the lunas ceremony for you, he said suddenly. Don't make any stupid mistakes, he warned, turning his back to me. I bit my lip at the sight of his well-defined muscles. I didn't know why I still found everything about this man attractive, even though he hated me. I forced my eyes from his rippled chest to his face. My broken sobs became a series of erratic laughs. Killian fixed me with a deathly stare. It made my insides quaver, but at the same time, it steered in a foreign wave of brazenness. I held his stare briefly, the intensity burning me up, causing me to look away. A ceremony for me? So, everyone can see that you have a mate, but still keep your lover around. I shook my head, stubbornly. I have been embarrassed already in front of the pack. I don't want to be embarrassed before the council. You can take your lover instead, I don't mind. Don't be mistaken, if I had my way, Thea would be the one coronated as my Luna. His words hurt me, but I pushed back the silly tears that were adamant on appearing. I'll grant your wish, I won't be attending, so you can have her as your Luna. I made an effort to keep my emotions out of my voice. Killian stared at me expressionlessly. You will attend, he growled. I would like to see you make me. I don't know why I said that. I don't even know where that bravery came from. The last thing I was trying to do was make him furious. Or maybe that's exactly what I wanted. I was still angry and hurt that my mate had a lover, and he loathed me. He didn't want me, yet he couldn't reject me. I was frustrated, and I wanted him to be as frustrated as I was. I glowered back at him from across the chamber, challenging him to force me to that ceremony. At this point, I could care less about anything. I had absolutely nothing to lose. Killian's eyes narrowed on me. He took fierce steps toward me. Part of me wanted to run, and the other, who was more in control, wanted to stay and fight. Killian gripped my hair, pulling me off the bed so our bodies could meet halfway. Don't test my patience, Sheila. We were only inches apart. I inhaled his scent, and a small whimper loosely escaped my lips without warning. Killian's eyes darkened a shade, and his hand pulled me closer to him. I could barely keep a staunch gaze. Electrifying sparks ignited on my skin, and my body became too hot. Killian released his hold. If you value your life, don't play these games with me. And with that, he stormed out of my chamber. It's been 2 days now since I last saw Killian during our disagreement in my chamber, and haven't stepped out of my chamber, or rather still, wasn't permitted to. My meals have been brought to me by Brielle and Ria. Surprisingly, Ria and I have formed a close friendship. She is truly a beauty, and I found out that she is only 20, and still hasn't found her mate, while Brielle is mated to Alan, Killian's beta. I was seated on the bed, with my arms around my knees. My eyes were fixed on the silken red dress that was Hanjin-ji on the clothing rack. Tonight, was the supposed ceremony that was held in my honor. I was still in contemplation about whether to attend or not, even though Brielle had pleaded with me not to anger the Alpha anymore. I sighed. It was twilight already. I could already hear the loud noise of chattering from outside the castle. I bet some guests had begun to make appearances. I closed my eyes, huffing again when the door pulled open. There was a triggering shift in the air. At once, I was aware of his presence, Killian. Somehow, whenever he was around me, the air seemed to surrender to his pleasant scent. I pushed my eyes open, exhausting every ounce of control I had not to gape at him. I had to admit, he was beautiful, even more so in his white embroidered shirt and his black tunic pants. Killian had a fit, strong build that showed his bulging muscles beneath the shirt he wore today, and his towering height made me shudder a little. Sheila! Killian growled from the door. What do you think you are doing, not still dressed? His voice was huskier than ever, leaving a cold trail down my spine. I tore my gaze away from him, not saying a word. The guests have started gathering at the hall, enough with your stupidity. I told you, Didn't I? I am not attending. I managed to spell it out, staring at him in defiance, although my heart was palpitating. Killian took slow and cautious steps toward me. Leaning closer to me, he suddenly smiled darkly. I was taken aback for a second, and his magnetic eyes met mine while his warm palm fell on my cheek. I gasped at the sparks that didn't waste a second to ignite, falling into his eyes as he caressed them gently. I am aware of how you feel about me. I know your heart is going into a craze. His hand trailed down to my neck. I fought the moan, wanting some freedom. His stare caused my heart to lose rhythm and my breathing started coming out unevenly. My heart rate skyrocketed as I carelessly parted my lips as a welcome sign. Instantly, his eyes darkened at my action, and he removed his hand from my body as if it burned him. He gripped my wrist firmly. "Get dressed, Sheila, and come downstairs at once, or I swear by the goddess, you will regret it. Do you understand?" He choked me harder. My entire being quivered. I wanted to tell him that his threat didn't scare me, but my heart had already betrayed me. I nodded sharply. Then, with one last menacing glare, he walked away and slammed the door behind him. As soon as Killian left my chamber, I angrily pushed out of the bed and grabbed the dress on the rack. I slid into it, and Brielle appeared just in time to save me from making a disastrous mess. She helped with my hair, pulling it into a tight bun, leaving out a little of my natural curls in front. Soon, I was all dressed. I looked into the mirror, unable to recognize my sudden transformation. I looked beautiful. I thanked Brielle. Just then, there was a knock on the door, and RIA sauntered inside, informing us everyone had gathered already, waiting for me. I sucked in some air, leaving my chamber with Brielle for the big hall in the castle. I raised my head and remembered what I had learned as a child. It was important that I carried myself with grace and did nothing to embarrass myself and, of course, Killian, even though he was a complete crazy. Everyone's eyes were on me as I kept moving. The place was packed with a lot of people, many of whom I was certain were from the council, while the others were probably alphas. I scanned around. There was no sign of Killian or my father. A frown found my face, trying to keep my rage at bay while mixing with a bunch of people I barely knew. On the other hand, Brielle was a real sweetheart. She never left my side. When I asked her about Killian, she simply shook her head. She didn't know where he was. A pang of pain sliced through me. There was not a single doubt that he was with his lover. I fought hard against the tears wanting to emerge. I really tried, but just couldn't win against my emotions. I turned away from Brielle, rushing to the door before anyone could see me in my messy state. Unexpectedly, I collapsed into a hard figure. Its force made me lose my balance, and before I could fall, firm hands gripped my waist, steadying me. I fell into his eyes. They were a fine hazel pair. There was a distinct familiarity within those gazes, almost as if I knew them, and at the same time, I didn't. It caused an ache in my skull. Before the stranger could speak, a loud growl silenced the air. I stiffened. Killian. Sheila's point of view. I froze. I whipped my head to where the loud growls emanated from. It came from the entrance of the hall, and a very angry-looking Killian moved hurriedly to us. My eyes darted back to the stranger. His eyes were on Killian's as well, showing no emotion. You are not invited to my party. What are you doing here? Killian said, barely in a low tone, his eyes lowered distastefully on me in the arms of the stranger. It was then I realized the cute stranger was still holding me by my waist. I quickly steadied my shoes on the floor, regaining my balance, and sent a thankful smile to the stranger, whose flawless hazel eyes regarded me with something in them. Something that called out to me, yet I couldn't just decipher. Strangely, they made my heart ache. Thank you for I began but was abruptly cut off by Killian's pointed words. What are you doing here, Kaiser? Killian was looking straight at the man beside me, Kaiser. From Killian's tone, it seemed the man was not welcomed at all. The council invited every pack in the North Central, so here I am. My brother sent his apologies for not being able to make it to your Luna's coronation. With every word that left Kaiser's lips, he never took his eyes off of me. And truthfully, neither could I. I still couldn't shake off the familiar feeling in my gut, like I knew him or was supposed to know him. But that was impossible. In my years of growing up at the Silver Mist Pack, I was never allowed to leave the pack house, let alone its territory. Even on days when the pack had guests, I was never allowed outside, instead, locked up in the solitude of my chamber. I was forced to jerk from my thoughts when Kaiser's soft voice filtered into my ears. So, you are the lady of this ceremony. He had a uniquely beautiful smile, one that held a type of unspoken pain. Killian's huge and domineering figure stood between us before I could take it. Get out, Kai. He counted each word in the most terrifying manner, making it obvious he had lost the last straw of patience. Quickly, Brielle's mate, Alan, and another guy called Mason were by Killian's side. The air around us became too uncomfortable, charged with a knife-edge tension. Brielle rushed to me and pulled me away. My mate and Kaiser stood, glaring at each other so intensely, a second away from lunging at each other. I felt the hatred that burned between them, and the intensity made my eyes burn. I had no idea what insanity had plagued my senses. I couldn't even recognize myself. Why on earth was I crying? Thankfully, before anything disastrous happened, a voice vibrated within the castle walls. Enough! 3 men strutted from the far end of the hall. They were quite older, and if you listened closely, one could note the rich accent that dangled on their words. My eyes rounded in recognition. The elder wolves. I had never seen them, but I had heard stories about them and the council. Everyone bowed to them, but Killian and Kaiser were having a hard time tearing their gaze from each other. What is this madness? There are so many eyes on you, for goodness sake, or have you forgotten this is a party? One of the elders spoke to them. You are correct, Killian grunted. This is a party, and the Black Pack are not invited. Another elder spoke up. He is a council guest. And an enemy of my pack. Killian voiced again. I watched Kaiser's face harden with sternness. He was vibrating with raw emotions of hate. His eyes traveled across the hall, finding me. The coldness and hate in his eyes flushed away instantly, his features becoming soft. He held my gaze briefly as if communicating to me in a language that I didn't register. Alpha Killian, an elder, began, but Kaiser cut through. That's all right, Elder Philip. I was merely curious about what she looked like. Frankly, she's everything I imagined, and even more. His eyes were locked with mine. I will take my leave now, he announced, moving to my side. Unexpectedly, he took my hand and said, "It's a pleasure to meet you, Sheila." Another growl thundered from Killian. Kaiser released my hand and stormed out of the hall. For a second, the hall was quiet. Killian cast a murderous glare at me. What do I do now? The party began again, and Brielle was by my side throughout. I mingled around with the crowd and had a few introductions with some of the council members, but they were as brief as possible, especially with the males. Somehow, they were almost terrified to approach me. I couldn't blame them though. Killian was across the hall, blazing murderously. His stare reminded me of the famous words, "If looks could kill." After a short while, 5 elders stood in front and announced it was time for the Luna coronation. Killian and I had to stand side by side before everyone, as the elders kept asking a few questions, to which I kept responding with an "I do." While absent-mindedly, I scanned the crowd in search of my father, but couldn't find him. He didn't even bother to care if I was all right or had been eaten up by the enemy. His lack of care shouldn't surprise me, but it still hurts me. I jolted when Brielle gave my hand a light squeeze, and my eyes fell on her and everyone else watching me. She mouthed an answer to the question to me. I turned to find everyone, including the elders and Killian's dark eyes, on me. One of the elders was kind enough to repeat the question. "Do you accept Alpha Killian as your mate, agreeing to the responsibilities of being a Luna to the Crescent North Pack?" My heart hammered against my chest. If ever there was a time to change my mind, and finally free myself from the beast beside me, that time was now. I could reject him here and now. Thanks to the presence of the elders, Killian will have no choice but to accept my rejection. Since my wolf never came, the pain from the rejection wouldn't be too extreme for me. I sucked in some air, mustering some courage. It was better to reject Killian now rather than live my life in constant agony of having my mate close by but unable to be with him. That pain alone was too piercing to endure. I inhaled, sparing one glance at Killian, then to the elders. Sheila Colasso. Just then, the loud opening of the doors interrupted my words of rejection. Everyone snapped their heads in its direction, and rage flashed through me at the person that entered. Thea Chrysler. She was definitely an uninvited guest. She held everyone's attention. Some had a knowing look on their faces, while some sent pitiful looks at me, and I burned with rage every second of it. My eyes fell back on the elders, whose bright eyes held mine as if curious about my next words. I accept. My rage has always been an enemy of mine. But at that moment, I could care less. My words echoed, sparing a glance at Killian's lover. She had an expressionless face. I couldn't tell exactly what she was thinking, but her presence seemed to affect Killian. His gaze never left her. That infuriated me, but the fact that I was foolish enough to even consider rejecting Killian so he could be with that thrash of a lover infuriated me more. I clenched my hands together, unable to think straight. I knew I had just signed my death sentence, but I was too furious to care about the mistake I had just made, accepting to be both Killian's mate and the Pack Luna. The elders smiled, turning to the guest. Welcome, Luna Sheila of the Crescent North Pack. A loud applause echoed around the hall. I glanced back at Thea, watching her fade back as she stormed out of the hall. As soon as the elders were done, Killian stormed out as well, leaving me rooted in the middle of the crowd. I hid my shame and pain quickly. I should at least prepare to get used to this. But if Killian thinks I'll be the only one getting frustrated and hurt by the bond we share, he is sadly mistaken. He has no idea how much pain I'll make him go through. I didn't know what else to do, because Brielle was with her mate, and since everyone seemed to avoid me, I decided to leave. I left the party without being seen, walking down the unfamiliar hallways when I realized I was being followed. I clutched a handful of my dress, feeling the presence drawing nearer. I spun around instantly, my blue eyes almost bulging in fear. Who are you? Sheila's point of view as I scanned around the lone hallways that led outside the castle, there was not a single soul. My heart was pounding hard in my chest as I quickened my walking. I could feel the presence trailing behind me, drawing closer. Fear jammed my heart. I swiveled around, and to my surprise, there was no one behind me. I turned around and instantly, my blue crystals fell on the figure before me. Who are you? I asked, sending a hand to my chest. I really didn't know what I was thinking, or why I suddenly became too frightened, but a second ago, I swear it felt like I was being followed. I deeply apologize for startling you. The woman spoke softly as I took her in. She looked unfamiliar. I hadn't noticed her during the ceremony, because she would have stood out. She looked older, maybe in her 30s or so, wearing a grayish-colored dress with a black cloak worn over her body, allowing her ebony hair to fall to her side. I saw you leaving the hall, and I simply wanted to congratulate you. She smiled sweetly at me. I managed to push out a smile. I told her genuinely, thank you. But, who are you? Her smile deepened on her lips. I am Valerie. She sent a hand out to me, which I took, noticing the black tattoo that stood out on her wrist. It was an unusual tattoo, which seemed more like a runic symbol. I'm Sheila, I said, and she nodded knowingly with a smile, causing me to chuckle. And you already know that. Nice to meet you, Valerie, I said, instantly liking her. It is funny how this night keeps getting weirder. The pleasure will always be mine, Luna. My eyes fell on the tattoo on her wrist. A thought raced through my mind. I pulled my lips open to speak, but Brielle's protruding voice sounded. Oh my, Sheila! I have been looking for you everywhere. If the Alpha finds out you stepped out of the castle, it will be the end of me. She rushed closer to us. I couldn't stop myself from rolling my eyes. I bet could care less whether I left the castle or not. I badly needed some air, I told Brielle, as she stopped beside me. Valerie, Brielle said, tilting her head slightly towards the woman. I do apologize, but we have to head back to the party. Valerie nodded, I understand. We will meet again, Luna. With that, we left her and went back into the hall. I spent the remaining hours of the party in complete boredom. The guests were the types that liked to party till dawn. Not even once did Killian return to the party. I tried not to care, but I couldn't shake off the image of Killian in bed with his lover. The elders had long left the party, and so had some guests from the castle. I sighed, holding one more faux smile, bidding farewell to some of the alphas. Then Brielle and I left the hall, heading to my chamber. I couldn't help but reflect on tonight's events. I was reminded of those deep hazel eyes of that stranger, Kaiser Black. He didn't seem like a bad person, even though it was as clear as day that he and Killian had some kind of history. I became curious. Too curious. I turned to Brielle, who was beside me, accompanying me to my chamber. Who was that man? Brielle folded her brows, questioningly. Kaiser Black. The instant I bit out his name, Brielle stiffened. Her eyes shot up to look at me. She shifted her gaze away from me and said, "He's an alpha of the Black Blood Pack." They both seemed angry at each other. Before I could complete my words, Brielle stopped walking, turning to me. She seemed nervous. "That's simply because the Black Blood Pack is an enemy pack," she answered quickly to me before we continued walking. There was something she wasn't saying. Deep down I knew it, but I didn't push further, so I decided to change the topic and we talked about something else. As soon as Brielle left me in front of my chamber, I sauntered inside, and to my surprise, Killian's blazing amber eyes came into view. He was in my chamber, sitting at the edge of the bed. It looked like he had been waiting for me. He was glaring at me, and I couldn't understand why. His penetrating gaze seemed to see right through me. More than ever, I wish I could hide away. I looked away from his biting glare, roving to the dressing table on my right, where I took out the hairpins that held my hair perfectly in a bun. Immediately, my long brown hair fell down my shoulders. "How do you feel?" Killian's menacing voice echoed in the walls. I turned to face him, glowering harder. The skin on my forehead folded confusingly. "About what exactly?" Killian was on his feet, but he didn't take a step closer to me. He wasn't smiling at all. His thin cherry lips pressed against each other in a grimace, his thick black brows curled up in a rage, beneath his dirty blonde hair that fell on his face. "Do you crave the attention of men so badly that you are willing to jump into bed with the first you meet here in my castle?" His voice highlighted his last few words, making me flinch abruptly. "No, I don't," I snapped in a similar rage. "And I don't appreciate the tone you are using on me. Don't lie to me, Sheila." He snapped back, swallowing the wide gap between us. He pressed my shoulders tightly against his chest. "If you don't crave the attention of men, tell me exactly what you were doing in the arms of him." He was talking about Kaiser Black. My brain registered, but my eyes were round and unmoving from Killian. I had never seen him so angry like this, not even when he had the warriors lock me up in the dungeon. I admit that I had always done my best to frustrate him just as much as I was frustrated, but this wasn't my doing at all. Killian was literally on fire, and his flames were directed at me, threatening to burn me. I should have been scared, but insanely I wasn't. I had gone crazy. Killian had finally succeeded in driving me crazy. I turned to Brielle, who was beside me, accompanying me to my chamber. Who was that man? Kill on a fearful thought, my intended word was immediately replaced with Alpha. No, Kaiser was only helping me, I had no idea why I felt the urge to explain. Killian didn't deserve any explanation when, in fact, he had a lover. You liar! His hold on me tightened. A sweet sensation spread through my body. I felt the rapid beating of his heart thud against my chest while I inhaled more of his scent. My senses clouded with stupidity, and I rested my eyes on his lips instead. I felt a growing urge building in the pit of my stomach, and I wanted nothing more than to press my lips on his and have that strong body of his have me pinned firmly on the bed while his lips and hands did wonders to my body. I felt myself turn on. This man's scent was capable of driving any woman crazy, he was simply desirable. Killian's eyes darkened even more, his breathing became more labored. Control yourself, Sheila. His voice was breathless and, in a whisper, with his lips at the surface of mine. I can smell your arousal. At his words, I broke free from the bubble of insanity that surrounded me, my cheeks coloring red from embarrassment. I managed to escape his grip, stalking the far end of the room. You know nothing about me to be accusing me of things like this. So, what if I do love the attention of other men? It shouldn't concern you since there is only one woman who matters in your life, and it's not me. Whatever I do or don't do shouldn't concern you. I yelled at his face, turning around and removing the earrings from my ears. I said something that seemed to have angered him the more. I could hear his constant growls, almost as if he was having an inner fight with himself. I didn't turn to look at him. I couldn't trust myself at that moment not to do anything stupid, like kissing him. I released a sharp gasp when Killian's large hands grabbed my waist possessively, slamming my back to his chest. I felt my body press against the hardness of his C0RE, which only made me release another gasp. Killian's lips found my ears, his teeth grazing my earlobe. You are mine, Sheila Colasso. He placed an indecent kiss on my ear while his large hands caressed my sides. I released a moan, feeling Killian's lips on the crook of my neck. He began to kiss it. My entire body trembled against his. Say it, he ordered, breathless. Say what? I couldn't recognize my voice. I felt intense pleasure in my body, and my need for this man kept growing. That you are mine, he commanded again, the hairs on my skin standing at his words, while his lips kept doing wonderful things to my skin. I didn't hesitate a second before leaning into his arms. Without much of a warning, Killian spun me around to face him. His eyes were completely dark and deadly, and his lips came crashing down. I couldn't believe it. Sheila's point of view, my entire body felt like it had been struck by lightning, and my senses were on overdrive. I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe. With Killian's lips on mine. His scent and touch consumed my body, making me weak and needy inside. It ignited electrifying sparks that caused my body to respond to his. He held my waist firmly and tugged on my bottom L.P. and sucked it gently. I moaned. Killian took the opportunity to dive his tongue into my mouth. My legs going weak and losing their strength, I collapsed into Killian's strong arms, and he welcomed me with his hands around my body. Killian sent his hand into my hair and tugged me closer to him while his lips kept exploring my mouth. It was magic. Being kissed by Killian made everything around me disappear and seem irrelevant. I had no idea what we were even arguing about a minute ago. I got lost in the sensation. Oh, goddess! What was this man doing to me? Was it safe to feel this way around a man that didn't even belong to me? But I can't help the way he makes me feel. It felt nice having every piece of me molded to every piece of him. I moaned and ran my hands up his chest, trying to keep up with his possessive kisses. He placed more pressure on my lips as his tongue kept tasting every corner of my mouth. I whimpered as he groaned more, at wrestling my body. I became hungry for more. I slid my hands under his chest, grinding my PS against his. My hands traveled up his back, finding his hair, which I tugged roughly. I continued grinding my PS against his like my life depended on it. I wanted badly to feel him against my bare skin. To have him inside me. Suddenly, I hated the modesty of our clothes that stood between our skins. Killian growled against my lips as he lifted me off the floor and carried me into his arms, pinning me to his chest as I wrapped my legs around his waist. He reached for the bed, and I felt my back pressed against the bed with Killian's body on me. I trembled beneath his huge body. I was panting so hard as his lips left my mouth and trailed feathery kisses to my neck, where his mark was supposed to be. He sucked on my neck, his hands slipping under my dress. I felt his touch on my skin, leaving a sensual burning trail that I was getting used to. Then all of a sudden, Killian froze on the spot. Why did he stop? His eyes pulled up to meet mine, and I stared at him with confusion. The dark mist had cleared from his eyes, seeming to have woken him up from whatever trance he was in. Killian jerked away from me like I was a plague and rose from the bed, muttering strings of curses as he stared down at me with hate in his eyes. What did I do now? Killian ran his finger through his blonde hair, staring down at me on the bed. With an undecipherable glance sent my way, he stormed out of my chamber, leaving me alone. I fell back on the bed, fighting the urge to scream into the pillows. What is wrong with me? How could I let myself fall so deeply? My body still hadn't returned to normal, I felt too hot for my liking, and only Killian Reid could quench this intense hunger within me. I hated this feeling. Third-person point of view. Kaiser Black jumped from his horse, leaving its reins in the hands of one of the pack warriors. His legs moved swiftly as he hurried inside the pack house. His face showing not a single inkling to his thoughts. He walked past the long corridors, quickening his steps as he took a turn into the Alpha's quarters. One last turn and he approached the tall door at the end of the hallway. He gave a sharp knock before pushing the door open. His eyes scanned the room until they fell on the beautiful woman sitting on a chair while combing her hair. The woman's eyes shot up, noticing him. Kai, what happened? You look. The woman yanked from her chair, her worried eyes gauging Kaiser. I am fine, Denise. It's really nothing. Where is my brother? He questioned the woman hastily. She could sense the utmost urgency laced in his tone, and spoke quickly. The office. She replied. Without wasting a second, Kaiser started towards the door, ambling with speed to his brother's office. As soon as he reached the door, it was jerked open. The room was dim as usual. Only the blazing fire at every corner of the room attempted to provide what little warmth and light it could afford. But it wasn't enough. At the end of the large office, a tall and huge figure was positioned behind the wooden table, immersed in the pile of papers that were scattered on his table. He didn't gaze up. Kaiser sighed, shutting the door behind him and stalking across the room. Still working late, brother? Kaiser settled into the chair opposite the man, but his words failed to get any reaction from the man. Both brothers shared a similar resemblance. They both had bodies that seemed to have been sculpted by the gods, and hair that fell to their sides that had the color of shady brown. While Kaiser Black's eyes were deep hazel, the other man had dark magenta eyes which fitted him quite well. The Luna ceremony for the Crescent North Pack was held tonight. Placing his elbows on the table, Kaiser rubbed his chin, ignoring the usual grunt that always escaped from his brother's lips at the mention of that pack. Leonardo, I went there. As Kaiser spoke, his voice became soft. But the man, Leonard, still didn't respond, busying himself by diving his quill pen into the pool of black ink on the table. Though he wasn't saying anything, his facial expression held the words, "Why did you even go there?" Kaiser ignored Leonardo's unsaid concerns. Leo, I saw. Kaiser paused, seeming to consider a thought for a quarter second before continuing. The last words seemed to have had some kind of magic, because Leonardo stopped moving, his dark magenta eyes falling on his brother. His grip on the brush was firm, almost in an attempt to snap it into two. Does she really? He stopped his words, swallowing a hard lump. It was obvious he was having a hard time completing those words. But Kaiser nodded, nonetheless, she looks absolutely different, but I can feel it. It's her. He sounded more certain as his words left his lips. You cannot be that sure, it's been a long time, Leonardo said. Kaiser seemed to be slightly offended by his brother's words. He retracted his elbow from the table, leaning into his chair. I would recognize her all right. She is really enough, Kaiser. Leonardo shut his eyes, pinching the skin on his forehead. He was frustrated, they all were. Please, he added, pleadingly, brushing back a tendril of his brown hair. I don't like her there, Kaiser said again after a while. Why Killian, of all people? Why? Kaiser could hear the subtle growls that left his brother's lips. He hated everything about the Crescent North Pack. It was like a sour taste in the mouth. No matter how they tried to get rid of it, the name of that cursed pack always left a stench behind. This changes everything, right? Kaiser rubbed his palm against his face, looking at his brother. Leonardo released a curt, no in response. It changes nothing. Then what do we do now? Another question came from Kaiser Black. Leonardo pulled his eyes to meet his brother's. He knew Kaiser would not like what he had to say, but they'd already exhausted so many years, they couldn't ruin everything now. It was difficult, Leonardo could admit, but his decision was for the best. We cannot afford any more mistakes, brother. It showed on Kaiser's face that he didn't like what his brother was saying, but still, he listened. Remember, we can't trust anyone. So, we do what we've been doing for the last 14 years, Leonardo said. Which is, came Kaiser's voice. We keep waiting. I promise we will have our revenge on everyone who ruined our lives. Only then can we take what is ours, Leonardo concluded, his eyes imploring his brother. Kaiser released a firm sigh of resolve. Fine. But I can't promise to stay away, Leonardo wanted to kick against it. But he knew his brother too well. Nothing he could say would make him stay far away from the Crescent North Pack. So, he resigned with a sigh. Just don't ruin anything. Third-person point of view. Killian rushed out of her chamber, panting hard. His breathing was deep and rigorous. He still could not believe what had just transpired between him and Sheila. It shouldn't have happened. It was a costly mistake he had committed. Kissing Sheila was the last thing on his mind, but then, he did it. He had completely lost it seeing her in the arms of another man. Even worse, it happened to be one of his enemies, Kaiser Black. It made him lose his control, it made him act so stupidly. Killian cursed at himself for losing control like that and making such a mistake. He couldn't blame Riker, he knew he was as guilty as his wolf was. They allowed rage and jealousy to cloud their senses. With a few hasty steps, Killian rushed into his chamber, taking off his silken shirt. He felt hot, battling with emotions he had struggled to keep buried. Emotions he never thought he'd feel. He could still feel the sweet, lingering effect of his mate's body on his. He could still taste the delicious and enticing flavor of her mouth on his tongue. He couldn't deny it, even though he wished he could. Sheila Colasso was a seductress, a stubborn and beautiful one at that. Killian groaned in frustration. He shouldn't be feeling any of these things. Rage, jealousy, and love were things he never expected he'd feel. He knew he shouldn't have lost control like that. Just the thought of what could have happened if he hadn't snapped back to his senses left his heart pounding in both excitement and fear. He could have marked her, he was only a second away from doing so. Killian cursed again, tugging at his hair. Even though the thought of marking her was thrilling to his wolf, Riker, Killian couldn't have that. He just couldn't let everything that he had worked hard for go to waste because of a flimsy mate bond. A lot was at stake. His future and the future of his pack rested on his shoulders. Was Sheila worth it? Killian had no answer to that, but the stern fact was she was still the enemy's daughter, and Thea, his sweet Thea, she was the one he needed. The only one that mattered to him and the pack was Thea. She didn't deserve any of this. From the minute Killian saw her and recognized she was the one the witch had spoken about, the only thing she had done was love him and help him. She was the key to breaking the curse inflicted on him by his own father. A curse that constantly torments him and steals the lives of his pack members. Thea was the gifted one Killian needed to save his life and the lives of everyone in his pack. He shouldn't be selfish. He just couldn't afford to be. Killian splashed some water on his face, hoping to get rid of Sheila's scent on his body. He should have rejected her the first time he laid his eyes on her. Somewhere deep in his heart, he knew she would be trouble, but he didn't heed to his gut feeling. He brought her into his pack and now, she was driving him insane. Riker growled at the back of his head, but Killian ignored it. These days, Riker barely says anything. Killian understood he was suffering as much as he was, or even worse. Being an alpha, he got to experience the pain of the mate bond far worse than the regular wolves. But Riker knew exactly what was at stake if he thought with his heart, rather than his head. There would be consequences. Riker growled at the back of his head, but Killian ignored it. These days, Riker barely says anything. Killian understood he was suffering as much as he was, or even worse. Being an alpha, he got to experience the pain of the mate bond far worse than the regular wolves. But Riker knew exactly what was at stake if he thought with his heart, rather than his head. There would be consequences. He learned from his father that being an alpha meant having no emotions, holding no feelings, showing no weakness, and having no mate. Deep down, Killian knew he was becoming the man he despised with his entire being. His father. The man who was the most hated and cruelest alpha in all of North Central, the man who didn't even bat an eye before cursing him and his very own pack. Killian felt a burning pain erupt from the scars etched deeply into his back. Strangely, they always seemed to stir alive at the thought of his father. He shut his eyes, leaning against the door. Inhaling deeply. His thoughts drifted back to the problem in his life. Sheila. He knew the second he met her in the Silver Mist Pack that she was the one, his mate, the one destined for him by the Moon Goddess, the one meant to be his, but his cursed fate wouldn't just allow it. His wolf also recognized the fragile beauty and wanted her. And that was a problem, but as usual, he chose to be as stubborn as a mule. Now, this girl had him curled up in her hands. What's even worse was that she had no idea what she was doing to him. She made him feel something he was never allowed to feel. He wasn't permitted to and didn't have the luxury for, not if he wanted to keep her safe and away from his cursed fate. It was better that way. He couldn't succumb to the feelings of the mate bond. Not with the curse still upon him and his pack. Claiming her as his would only involve her in his problems, and he couldn't have that. He wouldn't forgive himself. Also, he couldn't let his emotions show to the world. He would avoid claiming her for her safety, because if he did, she would become his everything, and would be on his mind every awaking moment. Sheila Colasso will be his main weakness. Killian had many enemies. He knew they would want to use her against him. His bad reputation would also endanger her life. Even though rejection was out of the question now, he had attempted it, but the words couldn't just escape from his lips. Not with those magnetic blue eyes of hers boring straight at him, imprinting his very own soul. He couldn't pull through, something in her eyes stopped him. He couldn't explain it, but there was something about her that felt different. This wasn't as a result of the mate bond, and Killian knew it. This was different. She was different. She was everything he wanted, but cannot have. Seeing her in the arms of another tonight, he couldn't help but agree with Riker. No one was allowed to have her. He may be keeping her away from him, but that's because he didn't want to be the cause of her getting hurt. But that didn't mean he would let her go just so any other could have her. He would never allow that. Regardless of everything, she was his and will remain his. Killian's eyes pulled open. The first time Killian met Thea, he felt it. She had the mark of the moon and the blessings of the goddess. Her presence in the pack had done a lot of good. The deaths and destruction in the pack have lessened in the past months. Even though he could still feel the cursed darkness in him, it was dormant. But the coming crescent moon scared him greatly. He sighed, burying his head in his palm. A new wave of immense pain crushed his insides, forcing him to release a groan. He had to have a word with the witches, and with their help and Thea's, the ritual would be done, and hopefully, the curse would be broken. Hopefully, he would be free. Killian was on his feet. He pulled open the door, making his way to the right wing quarters. To Thea's chamber, he needed her desperately. As if expecting him, the door pushed open as soon as Killian approached her chamber. Her small, rounded face looked beautiful in the darkness, her brown eyes holding Killian's, reflecting so much love and admiration. Without thinking, he reached for her and lifted her into his arms, leaned closer, gently pulling a hand to her cheek, and Killian's lips brushed against hers. It started off so tenderly and gently but soon became urgent and needy. She also moved her lips to the rhythm of his, feeling the familiar need growing on her. Killian tried concentrating his lips on Thea, but he just couldn't. He could feel it, it was different, one lacking passion, warmth, and maybe, just maybe love. But that wasn't important. He turned off every emotion and fell deeper into her. His fingers intertwined in her hair as he lowered her to the bed, his kisses more demanding. He licked her upper lips, wanting permission. As soon as she allowed him, he explored her mouth. She felt the weight of his toned body on her as he positioned himself between her legs. He began to trail kisses from her jaw to her neck. It didn't matter whether Thea wasn't the woman he desired, because she was the one he desperately needed. And Sheila will be non-existent to him, and it will stay that way. Killian's point of view. I woke up earlier today. I left Thea asleep in her bed. I didn't want to wake her up. For the past few days, I've been spending my nights in her chamber. This is an attempt to get Sheila out of my mind. Frankly, it hasn't been much of a success. I'm trying my best, and so is Riker, but I just can't seem to forget the insane moment that I felt Sheila's lips on mine. Her soft and warm body folded against mine. It's driving me crazy. She's all I think of these days, even when I'm with Thea. At this rate, I might lose the sanity I'm fighting to keep. I just finished my morning training with the Pax Army and showered in my chamber. I left my chamber and headed down to my office. There were some pending matters relating to the pack that I needed to attend to. My wolf, Riker, paced at the back of my head. He's been doing that for the last couple of days. He's been strangely restless and on alert, as if expecting something bad to happen. Well, I simply think he's like that because of the coming crescent moon rising. It was a big deal for us. It was on the night of the crescent moon, my father heartlessly placed a curse on me, affecting the pack. That night still haunted me. I was only a child then, having witnessed the death of my mother at the hands of her own mate. It was too much to handle. I detested that man more than anything in my life. I shook from my thought at the opening of the door. I looked up and Thea's beautiful face came into my view. She approached me with a cup of brewed ginger tea. I brought some tea for you, Killian, her sweet voice greeted me. She's so nice and beautiful. I feel really guilty, having her yet thinking of someone else. Thea didn't deserve any of this. She deserved better, after everything she's been through. It's been only a few months already since I met her. Frankly, I could say our meeting was predestined by fate itself. She was found at the borders of my pack. She was alone and didn't have the stench of a rogue. The moment I laid my eyes on her, I felt the connection between us. It was like magic itself, and she had the mark of the goddess in the shape of a moon, exactly as the witch had told me. I knew then that she was the one. Her fate had already been tied to mine. Thea was injured badly then, which caused her to lose her wolf. It took some time for her to open up to me, and I found out her pack had been attacked by rogues, and she witnessed the deaths of her parents. It was by sheer luck she survived. Instantly, I felt the need and urge to protect her, to care for her. And that hasn't changed, but deep down it wasn't the same as before. I sighed, feeling Thea's soft lips on mine. She began kissing me, and I pulled her in for more. Her kisses became demanding, and I went with the flow, caging her body in my arms. In short minutes, I slammed her against the table, running my hands over her body. My lips left her lips, feasting on her body. Her soft moans sounded in my ears. It was pleasing to the ears. I pushed down the sleeve of her dress so I could get more access to her skin. My hands had found their way underneath her long silken dress, making their way up to her. Just then, a sharp knock sounded on the door, interrupting us. It made me groan. Before I could answer, the door was pushed open and she walked in, and she gasped. Sheila! Why was she here? Confusion filled my eyes. The shocked gasp I heard from Sheila forced me to pull away from Thea. My wolf, Riker, howled in my head, demanding I do. My eyes fell on Sheila's perfect face. As much as I hated to admit it, she was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. Never had anyone looked at me with such innocence and purity. My heart shattered. There was hurt and shock in her eyes. I felt an overpowering urge to run to her, and take the unbearable pain imprinted in those blue eyes of hers. Riker was raging mad, fighting me for control. He had completely lost it. He hated the pain in her eyes, and so did I, but the breaking truth was that we caused her pain. Sheila's gaze shifted to Thea, but not a single word left her mouth. Her beautiful lips parted a little. It made me want to reach out to her and kiss it. Her eyes fell back on me, connecting with mine. I couldn't pull away, nor could I run to her. I could feel Thea's heated gaze on me. I couldn't even look her way. Do you mind? Thea cleared her throat, her voice breaking our gaze. It was then I realized her dress was still undone, and my hands were on her. I pulled away instantly, while Sheila spun around and left the room. I had to force myself to not run after her. Masking my emotions, I turned to Thea, whose gaze burned through me. I have some matters to tend to. I'll see you in your chamber. I forced the words out of my lips no matter how they sounded. I couldn't think clearly with her beside me. Thankfully, Thea nodded with a smile, placing a kiss on my lips. After fixing her dress, she left my office. I was torn. As I paced around, for the first time in the longest time, Riker lost control. The last time he lost control was years ago when my own father murdered my mother, right before my eyes. And that familiar rage found me today. I couldn't stay still. I wanted to see Sheila. I had to see her. She was really hurt. I hurt her. I groaned, feeling frustrated. Sheila's point of view. I ran outside, my eyes streamed with tears. I couldn't take the pain, running straight to my chamber. I could hear Ria's hasty footsteps chasing after me as she called out to me. I didn't stop till I reached my chamber, crashing on the bed that was ready to receive me. The emotions suffocating my chest were too intense to bear. The door opened and Ria rushed to me, engulfing me in her arms. I leaned into her arms, I didn't hold back my tears, I released them all crying into her arms. It was unbearable. Finding my mate in the arms of his lover made my heart ache. I knew this was expected but, regardless, it hurt me to the bones. The image of her body in his arms broke my soul. Ria kept stroking my hair, rubbing circles on my back with her other hand while muttering comforting words to me. I really didn't understand why he couldn't just love me. It made me feel pathetic and unworthy. And I hated these feelings. I hated his silent rejection. Abruptly, I jerked on my feet like I was suddenly possessed. I was filled with rage. Ria's wide eyes were on me. I wiped off the tears that had stained my face. What happened? Are you feeling okay now? She asked, with concerns, all of which I appreciated. But I doubt I will ever feel okay. As I turned to the door, Ria was quick to stop me. Where are you going? To see your alpha. I sidestepped her, leaving my chamber. I walked to his office, mentally preparing myself this time for the real reason I went there in the first place. I knocked on the door while Ria was beside me and waited patiently for a response. After a few seconds with no reply, I knocked again, and my ears picked up an angry growl from the other side of the door. He was angry. Good. Because I was too. Come on in, he grunted. I turned to Ria, who shot a pleading look at me, asking me to reconsider my decision. I nodded assuringly to her, holding on to the doorknob as I walked in. I shut the door behind me, turning to face Killian. His frosty eyes pulled right up to mine from behind his table. His lover was not in the room. He regarded me for a long time, with his expression unreadable. "May I help you?" came his deep, throaty voice. I swear I would have been turned on if it wasn't for the anger brewing in me. As a matter of fact, you may, I bit out angrily, squaring my shoulders while folding my hands against my chest. My eyes held his stare.